Salam Media.
And Sentio is an ethically based asset manager that is focused on delivering superior risk adjustment returns for their clients, regardless of market conditions. So for more info on their Sharia investment products, you can visit their website, which is sentiocapital.com, and that's sentio-capital.com. Sentio spelled S-E-N-T-I-O. And start saving towards your investment goals today. Sentio Capital Management invests for good. Sentio Capital Management is an authorized financial services provider. Okay, I look at the front piece of the Sunday Tribune in particular, and they talk about 400 plus people dying in the KZN floods, predominantly in the Durban Tegwini region, but of course including the broader KZN, going as far down as I think Ladysmith and other areas like that too. But they've got pictures, not of everybody, but probably about 50 people. And the sad part is, if your picture was on the front page of the Sunday Tribune, that meant you had died. So that's the tragedies. It's brilliantly put together, but it sadly reflects the reality of what has happened. Now, that's one part of it, and the mopping up and the rebuilding of KZN will certainly continue. I'm sure what can be done, but certainly it's a city that is now damaged and largely dysfunctional, right? Now, moving beyond that, the question is what started it and what happens next. There's a sense from some people that the impact of what happened in KZN last weekend was a direct result, not just of an isolated storm, of a climate change driven storm that turned into flooding. And as a result of that, there were warnings not taken, and there could well be more of the same down the line. So the question really is are we in a situation where climate change, the flood or the wave of climate change could well engulf us all? Let's find out more about it with Professor Tafadzwa Mabhaudhi, who's the climate expert from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Prof Mabhaudhi, appreciate your time. Good morning.
Morning. How are you?
I'm good. I'm concerned. I'm concerned because I know people like yourself have been very on side in suggesting, this is a climate change issue and expect more of the same.
Well, let me correct the perceptions a bit. We cannot attribute a single event to climate change scientifically. What we can attribute it is, to weather and natural weather variability. Unless we have done the necessary calculations to determine the level of attribution, then we can then statistically confirm whether it was a climate change event or not. But in the current case, we cannot directly attribute it to climate change.
Okay, I get that. I mean, that's a technical part. So because climate change, I understand, is a journey, and the weather is a moment, right? A 3-day or 4-day period. So I get that. Now the broader issue, however, that are we seeing, however, the effects of climate change, not so much to the point of we 1 degree warmer or 1 degree colder, but we're seeing it where it absolutely is beginning to disrupt our lives. Are we seeing that?
I think we have been seeing that for a while in many different facets of our lives. And of course, not all of them come with the level of catastrophe and disaster as the recent floods, but we are experiencing climate change. It's underway, it's ongoing, and we have to be more aware that climate change is happening around us and that there is an increased risk of weather extremes, be they droughts or be they floods or be it extreme hot days, which is another risk that we have to deal with. So we have to be prepared for those risks.
And I mean, interesting. You talk about increased drought. So when it's drier, it'll be drier than dry, and when it's wet, it'll be wetter than wet. You're in KZN. I'm in Johannesburg, and we have definitely had, two things, in my opinion: the wettest summer I can remember, and we've had the coldest summer that I can remember. It's just not pleasant. It's not the usual late afternoon storms that Joburg is famous for. Things have changed. and I'm not talking now again to pick up what you said. It's not like a 1 week story. This has been sustained over an entire season. Would that be the type of example you're referring to?
So to make it climate change, it would have to be sustained over several seasons,
Okay.
not one season. Would have to look at it, over several seasons, over like a 10-year period. And also then would have to run it through climate change models to be able to separate what we attribute to natural weather variability, because weather has always been variable, and what we then attribute to the forced climate change scenarios.
Okay.
But what we do understand from climate change is that the natural variability of weather is going to increase. And that is going to be accompanied by, those extremes which you are mentioning, that people are observing.
Okay. So you mentioned the dry becoming drier, the wet becoming wetter over a period. Are you you mentioned it would have to be sort of fed into various variables to determine whether we are in the midst of climate change as a world, not just what happened last week. And your answer to that is yes. So how is that changing our lives then?
So there are many changes that come to our lives, in many different ways. For example, we are going to have shifts in biomes or our natural weather regions. They are going to shift. What that also means is that areas that are suitable for the production of certain crops are going to shift. In some cases, they are going to expand. In some cases, they are going to decrease. It also means in certain areas, we are going to have less water, and the demand for the water is going to outstrip the available resources. It also means we are going to have more encroachment of people into areas that traditionally have not been zoned for residential. So it affects us in many different ways. There's also increased incidence of diseases as it gets warmer and wetter in certain areas, and the natural habitats for certain vectors of diseases find it easier to now cross certain boundaries that they could not cross before because of the weather regions. So
Mm.
there are many
And of
different
course,
ways.
yeah, and I get it. And of course, I mean, you mentioned about crops, changing because it needs certain climates. I mean, that puts the issue of food security as well on the agenda, isn't it? Already many countries in the world affected by droughts, but even in countries where there is sufficient crops to give us the foods we need, that could become an increasingly bigger problem too. Yeah.
That is actually a huge problem, especially in Southern Africa, where we are sitting, because Southern Africa is a climate hotspot, and the impacts are going to be felt mostly through water, as we are seeing now. So floods and droughts, they have the same impact on agriculture and food security because they are both destructive. So
Mm.
too little of water is destructive. Excess water is also destructive. So the impacts and implications on food security are quite significant in the region that we are in.
Okay, I want to pick up therefore before we wrap up with this important issue. I understand that what you're saying, and we can have this technical conversation about this. I in fact hosted the UJ cloud debate a few days ago with Professor Chiliti Marawala, and looking at the 4IR or the tech solutions to climate change. And we'll come on to that in a minute. But the more important one for now is I understand that many experts, perhaps including yourself, have alerted, the South African government and whoever's responsible for the issues of climate change. And by and large, these issues have been ignored, which makes us far more vulnerable than we should be. Is that the case?
I wouldn't say they've been ignored. To be honest, South Africa is quite progressive in the region in terms of our responses to climate change and adopting best international practices. So, for example, we've domesticated the National Framework for Climate Services, which speaks a lot to the issues of early warning systems as part of building preparedness. The South African Weather Service is currently working on a big project to update and develop an integrated climate driven multi hazard early warning system. So there are things happening. The challenge that is there is really of resources, resource mobilization.
Mm.
That are we putting enough resources into, climate change adaptation? Are we taking as much of an integrated approach as we should? Because it's not just about the early warnings, they were issued in this case, but the response was not there. So there's also the need to build capacity where the response must come from. There's the need
Mm.
for integrated planning and development so that people are not residing in areas that put them at risk of flooding and make them
So
vulnerable.
regarding KZN, the floods there, you're saying there were early warnings and the response was not there. Just develop that.
So the South African Weather Service did issue a warning in alert level 5 for the floods. The challenge, however, is the warning is issued at a national level. It moves to the provincial level, where it then moves to the district level. But the chances of it then moving to the community where affected people are, so that they are alerted, and the chances of those people knowing then how to respond to say if there is a level 5 warning of flooding, what does it mean? What is the effective response? Are we to evacuate from these low-lying areas?
Mm. Mm.
So that is the gap, which is a gap in dissemination and a gap in capacity building for effective response capabilities.
Well, the dissemination, I think, is a communication issue, and I get that. It's certainly something I will raise in the platforms I'm involved in. In terms of capacity building, uh, are you saying that is there a lack of resources, or are the resources misplaced from a South African perspective in ensuring that there is sufficient capacity? So when we have these type of floods, we are far better, which will be able to withstand the damages, and therefore we'll have far less loss of lives and far less damages.
I think there's a need to increase the level of investment in disaster management. Increase the human resource base in the disaster management. In a lot of municipalities, you find maybe one or two officials in disaster management who are also playing other roles, so they are not really dedicated to the disaster management function. So we need to capacitate that area. From a human resource perspective, also from an equipment perspective, and from a training perspective, so that the people who are in those departments, they understand, they're able to engage with the information, translate it, respond in time. At the very local levels, with the communities, ordinary people like you and me should be able to interpret such information. So there's also a need to package the information in user-friendly formats, so that
Yeah.
ordinary people like you and I, when you probably saw the level 5 alert, but it didn't cause you any panic. You just thought, oh well, there's going to be a lot of rain. Uh, so what does it mean? What should you do? Who should activate what response? So we need to build capacity also within communities, so that our people, they understand the risks, they understand the warnings, and they can respond effectively.
Yeah, and just think about it. Whether you follow the Christian or the Jewish or the Muslim faiths in particular, all three embrace the narrative of Noah and the Ark, and that should be easily explained to people to say these things happen where you get floods and it changes societies completely. Well, I tell you what, thank you for your time, most appreciated. I have a sense we'll talk lots more about this. I think we're going to chat to Professor Chilizi Marwala on the 4IR response probably in about 2 days' time and take it from there. But thank you for giving off your time. And that's Professor Tafadzwa Mabhaudhi, who's a climate expert from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. So there we are. We are in the midst of climate change, and slowly it is impacting on our society. Just wake up, look around you, and you see these things are happening. Things are also happening in regard to from climate change to crime change. There's been a kidnapping ring, and worrisome for citizens of Lenasia. They come from your community. Well, we're going to find out more about that with Faisal Patel, who's a senior digital journalist at The Citizen, right after this.